Hello, and welcome to Monumental, where we sit down with entrepreneurs, leaders, visionaries, and big thinkers making monumental change. Here's your host, Evan Holiday.
Welcome to Monumental. I'm your host, Evan Holiday, and today we have on Hans Struzina. Hans, how you doing, man?
I am doing really well, man. Appreciate you having me on. I'm really excited to be here.
Yes, great to have you on the show. And Hans and I, we actually recorded last week on his podcast. So be on the lookout for that, Another Way to Play.
Yeah, appreciate it. You did a great job on that show, and I'm hoping to bring just as much as you brought to my show.
Yes, that was a blast. So a little background on Hans. Hans rowed for 12 years, culminating as a member of the 2016 U.S. Olympic rowing team. So I was telling Hans, I think he's my first Olympian on the show just before he started.
Yeah.
But after the games, he got his real estate license 6 months later and has been pursuing all avenues of this business ever since. He's a Realtor Partner with a Wall Street Journal Top 100 nationally ranked team, the Gunderman Group, and they are the top team in the East Bay of the Bay Area and sell over $180 million per year with over $1.5 billion sold in total. Those are big numbers, man.
Yeah. Well, we're not quite to 1.5 billion, but we're knocking on the door, so we're getting there.
Oh, nice. And he also says that he and his wife are also investing in out-of-state multifamily properties. So, and then of course, host of the podcast called Another Way to Play.
Yeah,
so,
absolutely.
Hans, why don't you dive in and give our listeners a little bit of background on who you are, and let's get this thing started.
Yeah, man. Well, I originally grew up in the Seattle, Washington area, specifically in Bellevue, Kirkland, and Redmond. If you know Microsoft, you know that's where Microsoft is, and kind of dabbled around in a lot of things. I grew late, I developed late. So I was always struggling in sports, which was where I gravitated to as opposed to music or performing arts of some kind. But I physically wasn't able to compete with some of the other kids. And then eventually I found rowing. And the way I found rowing was, as you can imagine, it's a really small world. And somebody happened to know someone was rowing who my parents knew and said, you guys should try this out. As a family activity, we did. And I got in the boat the first time. It was kind of fun. Got in the boat a second time. It was going well. And then the coach said, why don't you join the rec team? And then the rec team led to the fall team and to the spring team and then to college. And here we are.
That's amazing.
Yeah. And so I just kind of took it all one step at a time and just tried to make the most out of each step. And that's sort of played out in a lot of ways in my story, which I'm sure we'll get into, but also into my real estate career now.
So tell me, how did you, did you set your sight on becoming an Olympian, or was that just a progress of all of your hard work and just wanting to step it up to the next level?
At a certain point, yes, but in the very beginning, absolutely not. We were a relatively small club starting out, and it has grown and grown and grown ever since I joined, and it's now a very big club. Sammamish Rowing Association's where I learned on Lake Sammamish, and the team had only been in existence for like 10 years or maybe just a little under by the time I had joined. And it had produced some good results and, sent a few boats to nationals here and there, but it was by no means a powerhouse, like in a recognizable name as it is today. So I was just kind of into the sport. I thought it was fun. It was something I could compete at without having to physically, tackle somebody like in football or jump someone in basketball, which I wasn't able to do because of my size at the time. And I just wanted to, make the top boat that I could get into. And eventually, it was try to make the 3V, and then it's try to make the varsity, and then it's, go forward. And it was never on my radar to go to the Olympics until really like the end of my college time, when I realized I was competing with guys and beating some of them who had gone to the Olympics previously and and or were on their various national teams and doing quite well. And I was holding my own in that world. So that's when I sort of got the bug and decided to go for it.
So what was that like getting to the Olympics? I mean, it seems like a pretty big shoes to fill. And then also like a pretty, once you get to that step, you're like, man, like this feels good. Like even just getting there is an accomplishment in itself.
Yeah, absolutely. And that only, in my opinion, comes well after the fact, because when we were there, it was business. It was like, yeah,
Right.
we're here. We deserve to be here. We've done the training. We're fast enough. We're good enough, etc. And at the time, it honestly felt like a letdown, because we got fourth ultimately in the A final, and so that means obviously one shy of a medal. And that felt like a failure. And I mean, there's a whole lot of baggage you have to unpack when you spend 12 years in a sport, but really like 5 years training after college to try and make a team and then get that medal and get on the podium, when you really tied up your identity in being a rower, because it's not money that's driving you. It's kind of the pursuit of excellence, for the sake of excellence. And yeah, it was a wild experience, and in retrospect, 100% worth everything I put into it. But at the time, it was hard to sort of wrap my head around that part of it.
Yeah, man, that sounds, honestly, I think that has a lot of lessons that we can learn, like in our monumental community can learn from, like, your endless pursuit of excellence. I mean, you said like 5 years after college dedicated to getting to the Olympics, and then even making sure you're competing and going for that gold at the Olympics.
Yeah,
Um, that in itself is translatable to anything that anybody wants to pursue and wants to be the best in the world at, or at
yeah,
least the best in their category at it, is, that endless pursuit of like, how can I get better? How can I get better? How can I get better?
totally. Yeah, and the other thing that's kind of interesting about the Olympics that you don't really realize until you're in it is, obviously it's every 4 years for this, every 4 years on the summer circuit, and then same thing on the winter circuit. It's only just offset. But what you're watching on TV and the races and the results that you're seeing before you when you're enjoying it at home or you're a spectator is really the culmination of a lifetime of work for somebody. And I think especially when you watch the A finals, I mean, frankly, the B finals a lot of the times are this way as well, but like all those people have the capacity to medal and to set world record. Well, not all of them, but most people can go really fast or do really well. And it comes down to just like how you perform on that one day, in that one moment, for 6 minutes or 2 minutes or however long your race is. And it's just like, it has to just come together so perfectly on that moment to hit it, to win that gold medal. And that was something I discounted going into it, is, we had the numbers and the stats to be competitive. I don't know if we would have necessarily medaled on our very best or won it on our very best day, but I think we could have medaled on our best day. But everybody could do that. And really what you're seeing, and the difference between a medal or no medal, just like a success in life, I think comes down to some of those moments. And if you, what I did for a long time was, if I focused on the result of medal versus no medal, it felt like a waste, right? But now that I've taken a time to sort of step back from it a little bit and realize that it was a huge journey and I learned so much from it, it got me into real estate and this podcast and some other things, that there's a lot more to the journey than just that one end result.
Yeah, I love that. And so, as far as you mentioned like what you'd been able to take away and take into real estate, what do you think are some of those high level things that you took away from that experience?
Yeah. Teamwork certainly is one thing that is just, it's sort of the cliche answer for most sports people, but I believe wholeheartedly that if you, in real estate or any other pursuit, if you think you can do it yourself, you're crazy, because you need help in marketing, or you need help in production, or you need help in sales or whatever. also being coachable was something that was hugely helpful to me as an athlete. Because coaches would tell me something once or twice, I would really work on it and I would start to implement it right away. And that's always like, as a coach, you want to see people just get after it right away. So that really helped me. And then the one that I was thinking about this morning after I was doing my workout was just the ability to be uncomfortable and be able to perform in some situation that is uncomfortable. I was actually doing a workout on the rowing machine this morning, kind of thinking back to the way I used to train. And this is by no means anywhere close to that level, but still got the same sensation. And how it's like, okay, how do I make this one little tweak with my shoulder or use my legs in a better way when it's really uncomfortable? And the same thing goes for real estate. It's like, how do I, implement this negotiation strategy or handle this situation with this contractor when I've got all this money on the line and I've got a deadline to hit? That sort of thing really has helped me in a big way be better at real estate just from day one.
Yeah, I love that. I love what you could boil it down to is like teamwork, being coachable, ability to be uncomfortable. And then, like you said at the end, of like taking what you're learning and implementing it, directly implementing it. And I think that's, like you said, that's applicable in business, that's applicable in life, that's applicable in real estate, multifamily investing. Like that can take you so far if you can actually stick to those cornerstones of becoming a better person.
Completely. And that's, I think, one of the hardest things to do is to be uncomfortable and still continue to perform. Because I'm an agent, as you mentioned in the intro. We negotiate, for buying and selling homes, but we play in a relatively higher level price point. So we're selling, $1, $2, $3, $4, $5 million properties. And those negotiations get pretty tense because not only is there a pretty high level person on both sides of the transaction, buyer and seller, but there's a lot of money at stake. There's a lot of ego at stake. There's a lot in there. And during these negotiations, I've found that when I was uncomfortable rowing, like those skills that I would walk myself through of like how to continue to perform, how to continue to take good strokes in that case, is the same skill set that I'm applying to how do I keep my head screwed on straight? How do I not lose focus of the end goal? And how do I make sure I don't crack and just like spend my client's money or whatever the case is?
Right.
And so that is, those skills I think are just totally invaluable.
So walk us through you coming out of the Olympics, you got fourth. What does that transition look like from Olympian to getting into real estate?
For me, it was sort of, I don't know. I guess I don't know what a typical path would look like, so I won't go there. But for me, what happened is the Olympics are the first, or excuse me, it's a 2-week competition, and the rowing events are all done in the first week. So basically, you're done by the middle, and you basically have a whole week to like go party. And your athlete badge lets you in basically anywhere you want to go, and you just can get tickets to every event, and it's supposed to be a ton of fun. But I didn't really have a whole lot of fun, frankly. I had a little bit, but not a ton, because I was so devastated by the result. And that sort of carried into me coming home and really starting to think of what I wanted to do. So rather than go straight back into training, I took a year off. And then ultimately found or was given an opportunity to get into real estate from someone I knew through my an Airbnb host from when I was training. And he offered me basically a position with his team as a satellite office up in the Bay Area. He was down in San Diego. And I used his back end, and then I would just basically make a bunch of cold calls and try and set up appointments. And then when something happened, he would fly up and help me work it until I got licensed. And then obviously I was able to work it myself. But so that was really the really short version of the inroad. And from there, he sort of opened me up to like multiple avenues where someone might just say, let's just go represent buyers and sellers. And generally you start with buyers when you're new in the industry. he's like, okay, well, let's do that, but let's also think about like, how do we flip a house? How do we do a wholesale? How do we maybe like buy a rental? Let's like every deal that comes in, let's see if there's a way we can work it other than just earning a commission. And that really got my gears turning, as I'd already sort of wanted to be in real estate in that way as an investor anyways, but he really helped me start to move in that direction in a big way.
Why did you already want to be into real estate on the investing side?
So my family has pretty deep roots in real estate. So my grandfather, my mom's dad, is a big developer in Seattle. Two of my uncles and a couple of my cousins took over those businesses and worked in those businesses once he retired. My dad on the other side was a real estate attorney, and he was always doing acquisitions of buildings, forming and selling of LLCs, all that kind of stuff. And then his brother owned and operated a couple of apartment buildings in Philadelphia. So I had a lot of these influences. So I always sort of knew that it was there, it was in my blood, and it was a good way to make a living. And I always just sort of thought that I would end up there, and I didn't really know how until I actually had to make that decision in late 2016. And I was thinking about going into a big commercial firm or a small commercial firm somewhere, and doing a commute into the city and being a broker and that whole thing. And it just dawned on me that I wasn't ready for that. And the opportunity to do this more sort of independent entrepreneurial thing came up, and that with the team in San Diego, and that ended up just being perfect for what I wanted at the moment. And I just ran with it.
Yeah, that's great, honestly. So really, it sounds like when you came out of the Olympics, this opportunity presented itself. You'd already been thinking about real estate, and so you're like, hey, let me give this a shot. And it sounds like it was a great opportunity to both expand your mind and help you get into real estate, where he was thinking about wholesales, he's thinking about flips, more than just the transactional nature where you're trading your time for money.
Yep, absolutely. And, to sort of caveat all of that, while I was training for 3 years, I was also working, and I had to work in sales and I say had to, it was a choice, but that was really the most flexible job that I could get, so I could also train.
Right.
And so I was studying sales through, Grant Cardone and a variety of other sources, and listening to podcasts. And then inevitably, when you're in sales, somewhere along the line, you hear someone doing something cool with real estate, and then found Bigger Pockets and started listening to all that content while I was, in between training sessions. And and reading a lot of books. So I felt like I was building a base of knowledge while I was training, obviously more on the side. And so when I found the opportunity to actually dive into it, after the Olympics were over, I had a clearer picture of what I wanted and where I wanted to go. And that couple years of education really made that path more clear to me than if I would have just been approaching this cold turkey.
Yeah, that makes sense. And as far as how you've been able to grow, what do you think has led to that growth on your trajectory of becoming, starting out as cold calling, right? And now you're doing your own investments. You're looking at multifamily deals. You're a broker on a Wall Street Journal top 100 team. How did you make that progression?
Well, it really, for me, started with education, because I'm a guy who wants to know the nuts and bolts first, like how does it work, from a contractualist standpoint, or from a, just a tactical standpoint, like what is the steps, or what are the steps? What is the process? And so it started with basic education, like I said, on Bigger Pockets, on some of these sales things, going to a few classes here and there and learning that. Once I had a grasp on the basics and just started to implement and execute, it then started to come through mentorship. And I think that mentorship is absolutely crucial in any avenue you're trying to approach, whether it's sales, whether it's real estate, or whether it's, being a parent. Having having someone who's been there, who you respect, and who's done it in a way that you would want to emulate is so crucial. And I've been fortunate enough to have that in my entire real estate career in multiple ways. And, you know, becoming a sponge, you know, consistently listening, asking questions, and applying, going back to being coachable, those things, it just, you know, success begets success in that world. Plus, when someone sees you actually implementing, they're going to want to pour more into you, and teach you more and give you more opportunities. And when you do that, your success graph is just like a hockey stick. It's just goes crazy.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, especially on that coaching point, I think that surrounding yourself with people, you know, whether it's a paid coach or a paid mentor, or just surrounding yourself with mentors that you're working for or working with, having that ability to have that close contact with somebody who has already done what you want to do, is already going the direction you want to be going, is powerful.
Yep. And I also want to point out, like we talk about mentors and reaching up. I also think that there's value in, you know, being not sideways, because that makes it sound like you're not moving forward, but be surrounded with people who are kind of in a similar stage as you, who are in the trenches with you in some degree. Maybe they're the same age, maybe they have a similar size investment pool, whatever the case is, because, you know, it gets lonely, especially when you're in this, you know, office by yourself making cold calls or whatever. And having peers who are with you, who kind of get it, who are trying to produce at a similar level, just like a team, right? Like you're training with a team, you don't train in a bubble, is really important. And when I started to find that and started to surround myself with a few more people on a regular basis, I also felt more comfortable in what I was doing on a daily basis, and more surrounded with like-minded folks. It just really kind of rounded out the whole experience for me.
Yeah, that's great. So you're now on the broker side. You are investing in your own deals, and then you're also looking at multifamily. Is that right?
That's correct.
So walk us through the investing side of the business and what you're doing there.
So it kind of started with kind of two deals at once. I started to flip a house. Let's see, it was in sort of early 2018. I closed on this place in April and started to rip it apart and put it back together. And we ended up making money on that ultimately. But right in the middle of that house being put back together, this opportunity to buy a rental property came up. And it was really scary because we didn't know if we had enough cash to do both. And we were really unsure about our financial situation, and just like, are we biting off too much at this one moment? And ultimately, we got a couple of key pieces of advice to kind of keep our heads screwed on straight. One of which was on the first rental property. It needed a lot of work. They were the previous tenants really beat on it. They were smoking in the units. They were just gross. And the agent that we were working with at the time, Aaron, said, you know, you don't have to do this all at once. You can do this in stages. And as soon as I heard that advice, it really changed my mentality around how you can approach a multifamily residential property, and the way that you can underwrite it, and the way that you can approach basically buying it and fixing it up and doing it. And that was a huge, huge mindset shift for me. So we ultimately closed on that rental, put a new tenant in place, turned the other unit over 6 months later, and ended up closing the flip and making our profit margin, which was a whole different adventure all at once. But it was once we got through those couple of months, it was like, oh my gosh, if that didn't kill us, I don't think anything will at this point.
So as far as, I mean, you mentioned you're looking at out of market multifamily opportunities as well.
Yeah. And that was the thing is the flip I was doing locally here in the Bay Area, the out of market was up in Tacoma, which is a bit south of Seattle where I grew up. And we were looking in California for rentals first, and then we went out of state into like Kansas City and a couple other places. And once we started looking at like logistics of that, like plane tickets and Airbnb and all that stuff, realized that the cash flow was just going to be eaten up based on, one trip out there and back with dinners and stuff. And so we thought, where is there a market that near where we go on vacation or go to visit family anyways, that also has, a lot of chance for gentrification and growth, that's got anchors, that's got, modern infrastructure and is on its way up, that's also near a major metropolitan market. And then I was like, oh my gosh, Tacoma. I'd known about this place since I was 2 years old, but didn't think of it until right then. And so we started looking there, and sure enough, we fairly quickly found this property that got us set up in that direction.
That's awesome, man. So you're well on your way to building out your family's rental portfolio, it sounds like.
Yeah, we just closed on our second property, which is about 5 minutes away from the first. And I was this one was a bit more expensive, but it penciled even better than the first one in basically every metric. And I was a little unsure about it, but I just put one of the units up for rent like 3 days ago, and I've had like 15 or 20 inquiries on it in 3 days. So I'm feeling pretty good about that decision all of a sudden, because the market is responding.
That's great. That's awesome. So as far as the next steps, like 2020, thinking about goals for 2020, what do you have in mind right now?
Well, I've got a couple on hand. So the first one is I want to sell $30 million of real estate in my real estate practice personally. I had a goal of 20 million this year, and I'm like just shy right now. I'm like really close. But I'm pretty excited about it, even though I may not hit it this year. So I want to get to 30 million there. Our next goal is to buy an even bigger property next year. We're trying to do one a year, but we want to get something over 8 units this year to try and double up the size of our portfolio. And so that is a sort of a new challenge, because I haven't taken on anything quite that big yet, but I'm really excited to do it. And it's going to force me to learn some new skills and, financing and all that fun stuff. And then the podcast, like I did start that this year, just a couple of months ago. I launched in September. And one of my goals is to figure out a way to monetize it so that it at least covers its own cost.
Yeah.
Because as you know, it's not cheap or free to start podcasts as much as, you can do a pretty good amount of stuff for very little money. To do it, it still costs money. So I want that to at least break itself even, like earn the money back that I've put into it and then break even. So those are the 3 big kind of business goals I have this year.
Yeah, that's awesome. So let's dive into the podcast. So you started Another Way to Play. What was the motivation to start the podcast?
Well, I had been thinking about trying to create some kind of a platform for almost a year or two, because, you hear Gary Vee talk about putting content out, right? So I was like, vlog, maybe I just post on Facebook more often. Do I do a podcast? What do I do? And I didn't have a compelling enough reason to start until I ran into a guy named Travis Chappell. And Travis has a podcast called Build Your Network. And I found his podcast, started listening, and he's basically talking about him starting a podcast and using it as a reason to reach out to his heroes and have a reason to talk to them, basically.
Right.
I was like, that makes a ton of sense. So I reached out to him, ultimately hired him as a coach. He helped me kind of work through how to start this thing, both sort of conceptually and on a nuts and bolts basis. And I basically am using it as a platform to reach out to people that I respect, that I want to get to know better, and have conversations and build relationships with people. And it's worked fabulously thus far. And I've really expanded my network just in the last couple of months. Like, you and I know each other through podcasting, obviously, and I've met a ton of other people like that. And so that was my main motivation. And then, from there, we'll see where the content and the messaging goes. But number one is just to meet people and have a reason to talk to them.
Yeah. Yeah. It's exactly how I started Monumental. And we had Travis on Monumental not too long ago. And it was phenomenal for that very reason. It's like, let's talk about all these benefits of podcasting. Like, everybody I talk to, I'm like, you should have a podcast. You should have a podcast. You should have a podcast. Like, everybody should find, and it doesn't even have to be a podcast. Like you said, like, it could be a vlog. It could be a daily live, like whatever it is, the platform you use to get your message out, your ideas out, or even like take on the ideas of other people and have on guests. It's just a great way to connect with people and build that network.
Completely. And, it's going to suck in the beginning. Like, you're going to listen to your first episodes. Like, you do your first 10, you're going to listen to number 1 and you're going to cringe. And then you're going to do your 20th and you're going to listen to the 10th and you're going to cringe. Like, it's going to be that way.
Right.
But you have to try, you have to get out there a little bit and give it an effort and see what resonates and see, how you can grow from there.
In your experience with your podcast, what would you tell others about, if they're interested in starting their own podcast, and then kind of what it takes to actually put in the work for a podcast?
Yeah, I really think that you have to have a motive that is something other than just getting a million downloads, because it's going to take a while to get there. And if you don't see that million download mark you're getting even anywhere close to it in the beginning, it's going to be discouraging. So, beginning with the end in mind of like, if nothing else comes of this podcast, what would I be happy with? And that's going to be different for everybody. For me, I was thinking I'm going to release 2 episodes a week. And so I'm going to have over 100 conversations a year with people who I respect and I like, and I want to open up a communication and a friendship with. And if nothing else comes of it, I would be totally happy spending the time and the money doing, having that be the result at the end of the year. So that's number one. And then secondly, it's something that actually Travis Chappell brought up, is if there's anybody listening, like any one person is listening, like give it your all, put the most into it that you can, because at least that one person is getting value out of it. And if you treat that one person like it's a million people, that's generally how you get to, the higher downloads, is when you put the quality, put the effort in over time. And then obviously you get better at creating the content as well.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And the 0 to 1 mentality of like, even if you just have 1 people or person or 1 or 10 people or 20 people or whatever it is, like, you never know who those people could be, and you never know how much you could be affecting them. And so I think you're exactly right. And also, like you said, like, make sure you know what your bare bones, like, what do you want to get out of this besides like the big success? Like, what is the minimum you'd be happy with? And I think you're exactly right. Like you touched on, like, you get to have conversations with all these great people and networking opportunities that did not exist before. And that's a big reason behind Monumental. That's why we started, because we're like, hey, I was like, that guy's really cool. I want to keep talking to him. How do I make that happen?
Yep. And one of the crazy things with podcasting and just in marketing in general, like I said earlier, I'm a sales guy. I kind of followed the Grant Cardone stuff and have gone through Zig Ziglar and a bunch of these other guys, Brian Tracy and whatever. And, we think in sort of linear scale of like, put in X effort, make X cold calls, get Y appointments, get Z closings, right? Marketing doesn't really work that way. You're making impressions that are really hard to monetize immediately and to obviously track. It's like, if you're putting messaging out there and content out there, like, people are going to see it. And they may call you in a year to invest in a deal or to buy a house from you or whatever the case is. So you can't discount sort of the long-term effects of putting content out there and creating a podcast, other than, the immediate ROI of like, I get a relationship with somebody. Like there's other benefits that take some time to come to fruition.
Yeah, exactly. So uh, as far as the podcast, are there certain guests that have really like blown you away, or like certain guests that you've really enjoyed speaking with?
Yeah. One guy comes to mind, Zachary Babcock, who has his own show called Underdog Empowerment. If you don't know that show, go check it out, because he's a guy who's spent 5 years in prison, had a bunch of drug addictions, and has really completely changed his life, and pivoted into something that I think is pretty incredible. And he had some crazy stories about being in solitary confinement and his mindset around that. And I haven't released that episode yet, but I intend to. And then probably by the time this comes out, I'll have had Steve Sims on as well. And if you don't know Steve, he is basically someone who makes impossible stuff happen for people. For example, he shut down the museum in Italy where they house the statue of David, and then set up a dinner for 6 there, and then had Andrea Bocelli come in and serenade the people who were his clients at the dinner. And he just makes stuff happen like that, which is totally crazy. And he has an amazing story as well. And I'm going to have that one out hopefully by the time this one releases as well. So those are 2 guys that I'm really excited. But I've also had some people who are like, my dad's been on the show, and just some people who are in my network who just have rich, interesting things to say. And you always can pull something out from everybody, even if they're not a big name like Zachary or Steve. And I think that's one of the beautiful things about this medium, is we can kind of get a little intimate with each other and get a lot of quality and a lot of interesting stuff out of it, because we're having a 20-40 minute conversation.
Yeah, I love that. So let's jump into our monumental questions.
All right.
So what does success mean to you?
Success to me is pursuing freedom. And that's sort of a theme I talk about on my show a lot. And I define freedom as both financial as well as location and time independence. Financial meaning you don't have to trade hours for dollars to make a living. You have passive income. And for me, that's rental properties, as we talked about earlier. But also the time and the location independence, like being in control of your day, not having to show up at 8 o'clock or 9 o'clock and commute, as well as potentially being able to travel as much as you want and still operate your business. If you want to go visit your family on the East Coast, in my case, like I would love to be able to work from this house that they have in this town called Coxet in Rhode Island. It's got a great view, and I could just totally see myself loving to work there. And if I could set up a life where I could do that, that to me is success.
Yeah, I love that. So do you have daily habits or morning rituals that lead to a great day?
Oh yeah. So I wake up at 5:40 every morning and come out, take care of the dog, and then make a green smoothie. And I sit down, and I've been sort of playing around with this next part. I was doing an affirmation journaling exercise, which I would recommend anyone who's trying to take on a new goal do, which basically you just write down your affirmation on a piece of paper until you're out of lines. And my affirmation this year has been, I'm a top producer who sells at least $20 million of real estate every year. And I did that to sort of train myself subconscious to be the type of person who could identify opportunities that a top producer would take advantage of, and be basically act like a top producer when given the opportunity. And I've basically swapped that for guided meditation on Headspace, because I'm trying to be a little more present and a little more mindful. So I'm working through that app right now and trying that out, which has been kind of fun for the last month or two. And then I read. So that's always 10 to 15 minutes. And then I read for about 15 to 45 minutes, kind of depending on how much time I have that morning. Usually something self-development or self-improvement wise or business related. And I'm reading The Alchemist right now, for example.
Yeah.
And and then I go hit a workout with my wife. Most days, sometimes I sleep, sometimes I'll take it easy and do some yoga or rest, depending on what's going on for the day. But generally we're in the gym by about 7:15, and then we come back, get the dog out to the park for a few minutes, and then it's off to work for whatever the day has.
That sounds like a great morning.
I think so. I sort of morphed it off of Hal Elrod's Miracle Morning, as many of us have, I think. And, I think I tried that for a while, and I think that's a great start. And then you have to sort of take what works and leave the rest for you.
Yeah.
And that's what I've done.
I love it. So that kind of leads well into our next section. What about your favorite book or book you're currently reading?
I'm reading The Alchemist right now, which I've found to be pretty interesting and a pretty easy read. Favorite book. I've got a couple that I've thought about. Thinking in Bets by Annie Duke was something that I read recently that I thought was really interesting, because it talks about kind of like what we were talking about at the beginning of the episode of not judging the decision making by the outcome. Poker, she's a professional poker player and has done very well for her. She's made like $5 or $6 million playing poker. You're making these decisions. You're literally betting like 20 times a minute sometimes, based on what cards come down. And she said there's a strategy and a way to make decisions that will increase your odds. But if you always think like, oh, I won the hand or I lost the hand, therefore I made good decisions, you're probably not going to do very well. Whereas if you judge the decision making and the logic behind it, more often than not, over enough samples, you'll win. And I thought that was a really great message to take away relative to business and podcasting and all the other things we've been talking about.
Yeah, I love that. That's great. Great quote. Well, Hans, this has been a phenomenal episode. I loved hearing your story and learning about your journey and seeing where you're headed as well. It's pretty phenomenal, man.
Yeah, appreciate the opportunity to be on today, and I've loved watching your success and getting to know you a little bit, and definitely looking forward to a big 2020 with you.
Yes, let's do it. So how can our Monumental listeners reach out to you or follow you?
Well, I've got my website set up, which is Hans Struzyna, STRUZYNA.com. And you can find out about my real estate practice as well as my podcast, Another Way to Play, which is available on iTunes and all Stitcher and all that places where you can get podcasts. And then if you want to get social, I'm most active on Instagram at Chief Snah, SNAH, which is my first name backwards.
Got it. Yes. Guys, connect with him, connect with both of us on Instagram. We're both active there. That's how, actually, we got introduced by Carl Sona.
Yep.
So thank you, Carl, for that if you're listening.
Yeah, you're the man, Carl.
But guys, Hans is bringing massive value, and especially with this podcast. And if you guys enjoyed today's episode, make sure to tag us, Hans, myself, on social media. Let us know you're listening, and make sure to leave a 5-star review on iTunes for Monumental. And with that, have a monumental day.